Have you ever wondered who the first inhabitants of Australia were? The indigenous peoples, the first Australians, have a history as vibrant as the land they've called home for about 65,000 years. These diverse groups, each with unique languages and cultures, were not simply inhabitants, but an integral part of the landscape itself. Their spiritual connection to the land was, and continues to be, profound and inseparable. Surviving through the last ice age, these indigenous cultures are among the oldest living cultures on the planet. They've witnessed the ebb and flow of time, the transformation of the world around them, and yet, their cultural roots have remained deeply embedded in the Australian soil. These first Australians, with their rich traditions and enduring resilience, laid the foundations of what we know as Australia today. Their legacy is imprinted on every aspect of Australian life, from art to land conservation, from storytelling to spiritual practices. Australia's indigenous people laid the foundations of a rich and vibrant history that still resonates today. But did you know that the Chinese also have a long history with Australia? Long before the English set foot on the continent, the Chinese were already exploring and trading with northern Australia. As early as the 15th century, Chinese sailors navigated their way to Australia's northern shores, establishing a thriving trade network. In Arnhem Land, Chinese artifacts have been unearthed, suggesting a complex and long-standing relationship between the two cultures. These artifacts, which include coins and pottery, are a testament to the long-standing Chinese connection with Australia. Now, let's fast forward to the mid-19th century. The lure of gold brought a wave of Chinese immigrants to Australia during the gold rush of the 1850s. They came in their thousands, seeking fortune and a better life. This significant migration not only shaped Australia's cultural landscape, but also left an indelible mark on its history. The Chinese connection to Australia is a lesser-known yet significant chapter in the country's history. And what about the Dutch? How did they fit into Australia's complex history? Well, let's wind back the clock to the early 17th century. The Dutch, then a seafaring superpower, were eager to uncover new lands and trade routes. Enter Willem Janszoon, the first European known to have set foot on Australian soil in 1606. However, it wasn't until 38 years later that the Dutch East India Company commissioned Abel Tasman to explore the Great Southland. Tasman charted significant parts of the western coastline, naming it New Holland, a name that stuck for almost 2 centuries. But the Dutch story in Australia was not all smooth sailing. The Western Australian coastline, notoriously treacherous, became the final resting place for many Dutch ships. These shipwrecks, now archaeological treasures, serve as somber reminders of the perils faced by these early explorers. The Dutch, in their quests for new lands and trade routes, left an indelible mark on Australia's history. But it was the English who would permanently change the face of Australia. But how? The transformative English influence began in earnest with the arrival of the First Fleet in 1788. 11 ships, carrying over 1,000 souls, half of whom were convicts, sailed into what is now known as Sydney Harbour. Their mission? To establish a penal colony in New South Wales, a place for Britain to offload its surplus criminals. The English, however, were not just there to create a penal colony. They were there to colonize, to claim the land for their own, and in doing so, they inevitably clashed with the indigenous population. The arrival of the English and the subsequent colonization had a profound effect on the indigenous people. Their lands were taken, their culture disrupted, and their populations decimated by disease and conflict. Yet the English colony survived, and over time, expanded. More ships arrived, carrying more convicts, but also free settlers drawn by the promise of a new life. The colonies grew and spread, reaching out into the vast Australian interior. The discovery of gold in the mid-19th century brought a rush of immigrants from all over the world. The gold rush not only swelled the population, but also brought wealth, industry, and a sense of national identity. Finally, in 1901, the separate colonies united into a federation, marking the birth of modern Australia. A nation that was once a distant penal colony had transformed into a thriving, independent country. The English settlement of Australia was far from perfect, marked by conflict and hardship. Yet, it also brought about tremendous change and laid the foundation for the diverse, multicultural Australia we know today. From a penal colony to a thriving nation, the English marked a new era in Australia's history.